what kind of person would your ideal legal system absolutely hate having to deal with?
A competent con man, somebody who was good at persuading people of things that were not true, that was in his interest for them to believe.
And I ask these of all my guests just to get
Sure.
so people get a better sense of you as a person, not necessarily as someone who's informing us of their position. So let me ask you this. First question. After years of medieval reenactment in the Society for Creative Anachronism, what's one rule people think they require authority for, but it turns out that they mostly don't?
It's not exactly the same thing, but in my experience, the SCA is more medieval in practice than it is in theory. That is to say, it is structured. It's a modern American, no longer American, but initially American institution,
Right.
Californian institution initially, and it is structured as a more or less hierarchical system in which the corporate official in charge of fighting appoints the regional official in charge of fighting, appoints the local official. But that's not what really happens. What really happens is that the local group finds somebody who's willing to be in charge of the fighting, tells the next step up, we found somebody, and he approves of it, and so forth. So it really is a system where I like to say that the defining feature of a feudal order is that the key resource is held at a low enough level so that the ruler is a coalition leader rather than a real absolute monarch. That people tend to confuse feudalism with absolute monarchy, but in fact, absolute monarchy was was the destruction of feudalism. And in the SCA, the key resource is volunteer labor, and volunteer labor is controlled by the local group. So, so that is not exactly your point, but it's a related point. The way in which the dynamics of the situation drive things, even if it's not going the way the formal organization thinks it should.
Yeah, it seems like the intent was for the hierarchy to work top down, but it ends up either bottom up or close to the bottom, and then working its way up. Okay. Second question. Pick one scientist you admire and one economist or libertarian thinker you admire. Now pretend they're locked in an intellectual thunderdome. Who walks out and why?
I don't know enough about thunderdomes. The economist who I probably admire most is David Ricardo. And I'm not sure it counts as a physicist, but I suppose the person in that general field I would be inclined to admire most is John von Neumann.
Von Neumann,
and
okay.
I think that they were comparable people. That I think they would have a very interesting conversation. Von Neumann might have been smarter. On the other hand, von Neumann had access to intellectual tools that Ricardo didn't. And what really impresses me is how much Ricardo did with the very limited tools he had. That I like to describe the Ricardo essentially invents general equilibrium theory, which is something that any economist could tell you requires advanced mathematics, and he has nothing beyond arithmetic. And I like to describe it as that the modern economist reading Ricardo, it's as if you were in the first Mount Everest expedition, and as you approached the peak, you were passed by a hiker in t-shirt and tennis shoes coming down.
That's a nice mental image, yeah.
But von Neumann was a very smart guy.
Sure. I don't know why. I thought you might have, for your scientist, I don't know why, maybe because I enjoyed listening to his lectures. I thought you might have gone with someone like a Feynman or something like that.
Feynman was also an impressive person. That's true.
Yeah.
I think he was not as nice a person as Ricardo.
Okay.
one of his hobbies after his wife died was seducing his neighbors, his colleagues' wives. But he was certainly a very smart physicist.
Okay, that's true. Okay, you grew up in a household where ideas clearly mattered a lot. If I were to join the family for dinner somewhere, would it be a lively debate or would it be a quiet meal?
Could be either. I used to say that the libertarian traditionalist split ran down our dining room table, and that was an exaggeration. That Mother was certainly not as much of a traditionalist as people think of as a traditionalist, but I think she was at least less committed to the libertarian side of that debate than but it would depend a lot. I mean, I argue with my kids quite a lot. I argue with my father quite a lot, and it's fun. My wife likes, one of my wife's comments is that she came across somebody saying that a married couple should never settle, and that they were making the mistake of thinking of an argument as a quarrel.
That is true.
An argument is not a quarrel. An argument is an intellectual exercise. And that's sort of like saying that you should not go to bed with a chess game unfinished. I mean, you might want to quit the game, because it was 1 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
So.
Okay, that's a good. I like that answer. Are there any government monopolies that you'd keep as you see them now? Not because you necessarily like them, but because you don't see a viable alternative just yet?
I think the one which is the best defense, the most plausible, is national defense.
Okay.
And I hope that I can replace that.
Yes, we all do, believe me. But you're right. It could be that we just haven't found that practical alternative yet. Okay, and the final question. Be honest. What kind of person would your ideal legal system absolutely hate having to deal with?
A competent con man?
A competent con man. Yeah.
Somebody who was good at persuading people of things that were not true, that was in his interest for them to believe.
Do you see anybody out there that might fit this description that you just made? Any real life examples?
No one in particular occurs to me. That Trump does it for certain people, but he's very obvious about it for most people. So he's a competent demagogue, but I'm not sure he'll be competent. He'd probably be a more competent than average con man, but I don't think he would be an extraordinarily competent con man.
Right. Not to focus on President Trump, but a con man who was very good at persuading people to act against their own self-interest consistently would represent the greatest challenge to your legal framework.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, great. David Friedman, thank you so much for joining us.